Welcome to Now Playing Podcast's review of Tetris.
Tetris? I don't get it.
It's a combination of tetra, Greek for four, all the game's pieces are variants of four, and tennis.
Tennis?
Tennis!
Part of Now Playing's video game movie review series.
So you want to see new games?
No. We're here for Tetris.
Hosted by Arnie.
By day, he worked as a programmer, but by night, he invented games for fun.
Justin.
I'm basically Eddie Van Halen.
And Stuart.
We are a united front. Understood?
This episode will contain detailed plot spoilers and strong language.
If you go, we can't protect you.
Listener discretion is advised.
I can't wait to see your show.
Today, we're discussing Tetris, starring Taron Egerton, Nikita Efremov, Sofia Lebedeva, Anthony Boyle, and Toby Jones, directed by John S. Baird. This is Arnie, co-host of Now Playing. I'm back, and I brought friends.
I guess that includes Stuart?
And I'm the line when you need a block, Justin.
You're the guy we call video game movies. Wow, they really did it. I mean, it's been a running joke, right? Next to Pong, this is the least likely thing to get adapted into a movie. I do remember there was this short that kind of circled around it like about 8 years ago, virally, that somebody had the idea that it would be like Battleship, like aliens would drop blocks on major cities and destroy buildings.
I remember that. I saw that. It was rather amusing, and they sort of did it in pixels.
Yeah. When you hear they made Tetris the movie, I think your first reaction is big Hollywood blockbuster based on a stupid idea of blocks falling on people. A disaster movie.
That's what I thought when you said there was a Tetris movie coming up for the video game review series, and I was just like, oh God, no.
Right. Red arrows. Ready. Yeah. Grab them. Yeah. By the handful.
That's where my mind went to. I was like, okay, it's either a big, crappy, pixels-like blockbuster or it's a sour, dour, dry documentary.
Documentary. Yeah, we covered that. And it's closer to that. This is like The King of Kong if it was dramatized, if it was done by actors. We've occasionally covered stories behind video games, and that's what they decided to do, which I thought sounded really cool. I mean, as a kid who grew up in the 80s, remembers the Cold War, the idea that this was some kind of political thriller, a spy smuggled out from behind the Iron Curtain, all the tease of this, but there was some incredible story about a video game becoming this worldwide phenomenon that had to do with the Soviet Union. Yeah, I was intrigued.
Yeah, the moment I saw what it was, the moment the trailer came out, I immediately became interested. It looked like the kind of movie I'd watch even if it wasn't part of our video game retrospective series, and honestly, it helps that it's on Apple TV, just a click away. I don't have to go to a theater.
It feels like a cable movie. Like, cable movies are the ones that make current event kind of dramatizations. This doesn't look like something that would play at the multiplex, certainly these days. And also, pretty happy to see producer Matthew Vaughn's name on this. The man that gave us Kick-Ass, the man that revived the X-Men franchise in a way that I feel like was successful.
Let's not forget Kingsman. I mean, that first Kingsman is still one of my favorite movies, even if that third one isn't.
Yeah, his name associated means probably quality, although that third Kingsman movie, that second Kick-Ass movie, I wasn't that big on Rocket Man either, which I guess Taron Egerton got a lot of acclaim playing Elton John. I thought it was kind of formulaic.
It was, but it was fun. He was really good in it. When I saw Taron Egerton from the Kingsman movies, the first two, was going to be starring in this, that also raised my interest a little bit. I think he's pretty good as an actor.
Yeah, that movie feels like it suffered because it was in the wake of the Queen biopic, right? So it was like, given a little more time and space, that might have been a bigger hit and upped Vaughn's stature a little bit more. But at the time, it felt a little too wake-ish. Yeah, maybe. I also want to point out, Matthew Vaughn is not directing this, and that had me curious about who John S. Baird is. Uh-oh. Level expectations lowered. Oh my God. So I guess I had tried to watch his first film many years ago. Filth, the guy that wrote Trainspotting,
apparently had another book, and they adapted it, and I don't know, maybe you have to be Scottish, but it was essentially James McAvoy screaming cunt at everyone for, I don't know, I made it 45 minutes and I turned it off. Never even wanted to complete this thing. But his second film got a lot of acclaim, so I'm like, okay, let me try out Stan and Ollie. This might be the worst movie, or at least the most inessential movie I've ever seen in my entire life. You hear Stan and Ollie, Laurel and Hardy, you think it's going to be like Chaplin, right? It's going to be like this story about how this comedy team, silent films, how they got together and all that. It is two old men over the hill grousing about their cheap hotel rooms in their last days of relevancy. Like, this guy must just like specialize in this. I want to find outdated topics and talk about financial minutia. I mean, this is like, okay, Tetris. Let me find a 40-year-old video game and talk about the Japanese rights to the console versus handheld. Who wants to see movies about these kinds of things? It cracked me up. If he made a porno, it'd be about like the pizza boy making the pizza or like the maid turning over the bed afterwards. Like there's no action to his movies. So that definitely was, it was a reason to give pause. And again, I struggled with this one. It took 3 attempts to successfully sit through this in one viewing.
Oh, wow. I watched this in one viewing, but you talk about the contract stuff. The vibe I was getting off the trailer and the early scenes here, it suddenly reminded me of The Social Network, another movie about behind the scenes machinations and double crosses and everything of computer software. And then when I was reading up on the film after seeing it, I see Social Network was a direct influence on this film. So that kind of stuff can be interesting. I loved The Social Network. I don't know if John S. Baird is David Fincher.
I know he's not.
But it still could be good.
Yeah, Social Network is an apt one to bring up. I'd also argue Argo is in this kind of same vein.
Movies I liked. Let's see if Tetris makes the cut as well. Arnie, why don't you give him this plot? And whoo, I don't envy you.
Tetris tells the story of how the best-selling, world-famous game went from one Russian programmer's hobby project to a global bestseller. That Russian programmer is Alexei Pachinov, who worked for Elorg in the USSR. Taron Egerton plays game programmer and software salesman Hank Rogers. In 1988, at the Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas, Hank comes across a booth selling the licensing rights to a game called Tetris. Hank remortgages his house to get the rights to Tetris in Japan for the Nintendo home console and the arcades. But the company selling the licenses, the crooked and bankrupt MirrorSoft, didn't actually have the proper license agreements. Hank loses his arcade license, but still makes an agreement with Nintendo to distribute Tetris on the Nintendo Entertainment System.
I'm going to make it a drinking game. Every time you say license, take a shot of vodka. I ain't going to be sober by the time you get done.
This relationship with Nintendo leads to the video game company revealing to Hank their newest product, the handheld console, the Game Boy. Hank convinces Nintendo that Tetris is the perfect game to bundle with the Game Boy. The only problem is, no one has landed the handheld rights to the Russian game. To obtain this, Hank travels to Russia and begins to negotiate with Elorg directly. However, smelling money, MirrorSoft is also trying to obtain the license for handheld rights. There are a lot of machinations and licensing agreements that would be word salad if I went through it all here, but suffice it to say the Russian government wants MirrorSoft to have the game, but Hank's all-American can-do attitude wins over certain higher-ups at Elorg. With some financial backing from Nintendo themselves, Hank negotiates the worldwide rights to Tetris for console and handheld. The Game Boy comes out with Tetris packaged in, and the rest is history for the widely popular black and white handheld system. But Hank doesn't forget the original programmer Alexei, and as the USSR crumbles, Alexei travels to America and becomes Hank's partner in the Tetris Corporation, and credits roll. And before we even get into this, all I could think of with Game Boy is, imagine how different the story would be if they decided to reveal to Hank the Virtual Boy, that headache-inducing 3D headset. That was a total flop.
Yeah, I actually never even owned a Game Boy, so I don't have any nostalgia for this device. I had moved on to the Sega Genesis. Pity me.
So yeah, right off of the plot summary, I'm kind of sitting on Stuart's side right now where it's like, how did this get made? What was the pitch to the people that pull the string and write the check on this?
I think they told them blocks from the sky coming from aliens, and then they just made this.
It had to be an amazing elevator pitch is all I'm saying, because on paper, this does not sound like it's going to be watchable.
But you know what? Here's one thing about you can definitely say about our generation, nostalgia. We were nostalgic in the 90s for the 80s. So yeah, you're going to design a movie that has all the stylings of 8-bit graphics and everything they do here in the beginning with the electronic music and the pixelated imagery. That's a grabber.
This has been done so many times before, though. As a video game lover, on Netflix, there are so many documentaries about video games, and they do all kinds of recreations in this 8-bit style to recreate, this game programmer went and pitched this to the board, and it's all in 8-bit style, and they recreate certain scenes from games because you don't have the licensing rights to actually include the footage, and so this really felt to me kind of like I've seen this before, but I like it. I liked it in the documentaries I watched. I like it here. It's kind of a cute way to introduce the characters.
Yeah, I agree with you, Arnie. At this point, it does feel rote and well-worn territory, but I'd be hard-pressed to figure out a different way to do it here, and I'm glad that they did. Just because we've seen it a ton of times doesn't mean that the general moviegoer has sat through this many movies and docs in the video game era.
And Minecraft is still popular, right? There's just something about seeing people done in 8-bit ways that even if you've seen it 100 times, you love it. You want to live in that world. They could have done the whole movie in this. Maybe they would have had something, but it kind of goes away. Short of like 1 or 2 scenes where our main character is going to imagine himself as Mario and leveling up, looking for a mushroom, so to speak.
Our contract is in another castle, right?
Yeah, I mean, you have to do something to dramatize contract negotiations because the subject matter of this is very much back alleys and boardrooms. It's going to be talking about who has the rights to video game consoles versus handheld devices. Getting into the weeds, insider baseball. Like, this is the kind of stuff that only appeals to a very niche audience. And so to make it fun, we have to create a hero. Why do we like Hank? I think because, one, he can admit he's wrong. When we see him at the start here, he's at a Vegas video game show pitching Go. He designed the ancient Asian game, some know it as Othello, as a computer game that nobody wanted to play.
Go and Othello do have some differences to them.
I'm sure they do. Look, I ain't playing either of them. He says it's like chess, but infinitely harder. I haven't even learned chess yet, so it's not my game.
But it is fun to think of this guy as a game programmer instead of just as some salesman. But what I want to know, looking at this movie, is how did Taron Egerton get this role? It has to be his connection with Matthew Vaughn, because as I'm watching this, all I can think of is this feels like the stereotypical Matt Damon role. How many movies has Matt Damon made where he's this middling executive can-do guy who gets in over his head? I think of The Informant. I think of Air, which I haven't seen yet. It's coming out. But it looks like another one of those. And he just seems to make this movie so many times. I'm like, this feels like Matt Damon light.
Well, Matt Damon's a little old for it right now. And I do think part of the way you're going to help audiences realize what player to root for is by finding a young, youthful, energetic, good-looking, scrappy guy that's going to be the mustache and his shorter dimensions make you think that he's the underdog in all of this. There are fat cats with a lot of money, and he's really taking a lot of risks.
Yeah, as an audience, we're going to need somebody with a whole heap and helping of optimism to grab onto to get through these contract negotiations, right? If there's nobody to root for, this is going to fall flat real quick.
Yeah, exactly. And we see very early on, they introduce the idea he's got to go to this Japanese bank in America. Rick Yoon, we've seen him in a lot of action movies, Fast and Furious among them, is the banker that's going to decide whether even to give him seed money so that he can get, all right, hold on for it. What, is it Japanese Tetris rights for video game, arcade game, Anything else? Computer?
Nope, just those two.
Okay, he can't even have the computer rights. Okay.
The computer rights were already sold, but he was going to have arcade and console system, which with Nintendo exploding at the time that it did, would be a huge market. Although just Japan.
Right, yes. You think about how small that is. That, to the listener, the layman, me, this doesn't sound like much of an ask, or maybe a lot of money to ask for something that doesn't sound like much. But Tetris, we all do know, becomes this worldwide phenomenon. And I learned a little bit here. He's going to tell this banker the story. Even though this movie is set in 1988, Tetris got designed 4 years before in 1984. We meet the programmer Alexei Pajitnov.
Yeah, I liked this as a old school gamer who played text-based games and games where little text symbols like brackets and asterisks represented the Starship Enterprise and what have you. It was fun for me to see the original Tetris that was just all green, just all brackets, and how this one guy developed it. And this is the thing about games, and right now I think the platform for this is mobile, where you just need to have the perfectly simple game to make $1 billion. And that's what Tetris really is the epitome of, is simplistic. There's only, 4 shapes, I think they said, hence Tetra.
Yes.
And you just have to form the lines. And that's something that they're going to mention here that parents will play. That's how you make the $1 billion, is not just appealing to the gamers, but appealing to gamers' parents, appealing to casual gamers, getting everybody on board.
And in 2023, that may sound like, no big deal. But I mean, in the late 80s, it was a huge deal for adults to pick up a controller. That was kid stuff completely. And I remember I had a friend's mom who was addicted to Tetris, and we thought that was just the craziest thing ever at the time.
Yeah, Mom never picked up the console. Dad played a little, but it was considered a toy. The Atari, ColecoVision, all of that stuff. It was generational. Like, that was for my brother and I to play with, and the expectation is we would grow out of it. Nobody in my household saw video games being a future market. So, yes, Tetris changes the game in part because it, I guess, legitimizes playing video games to all audiences, grandmas, whoever. And yes, it's fun to see, a game that isn't very visually sophisticated to begin with, and these rudimentary, non-graphic card, just parentheses falling down the screen and getting copied on floppy disks, passing around the Soviet Union. We see the chain of events, and this is where Toby Jones, playing Robert Stein, enters the picture. He is a carpetbagger. He basically... Just keep in mind, Soviet Union, it's not like they encouraged commerce, but he was a businessman that would slip behind the Iron Curtain and find games and bring them back and sell them for a pittance. Seems like a side hustle that, again, wouldn't yield you much, but he stumbles on Tetris.
Toby Jones playing a Toby Jones type here. I think he always plays the, stern, powerful, but yet his attitude belies his physicality. I think of him, my first go-to is always Captain America, the First Avenger, where he was Arnim Zola.
I would go with Truman Capote, but okay.
I haven't seen that film.
Oh, well, he did a good job. He didn't win the award. Philip Seymour Hoffman was in the one that won, but he did the other one. But yeah, Toby Jones, I in my mind, I almost always want to call him Toady Jones. Yeah, he's always kind of a creep. I guess he's not a bad dude here. He feels like a villain. But in the end, he gets screwed too, because he brings Tetris to the real villains. There is the Mirrorsoft company in London, and there's this dad character who's a multi-million-dollar media tycoon, bow tie, blue suit, and I just love the way that he's like, don't mind the auditors that are in this room, shredding documents and all that. We have it telegraphed pretty early on that, financially speaking, he's made a lot of corrupt decisions and has a son who very much wants to be thought of as the Maxwell that's in charge, but he's just Kevin to most people.
Yeah, from that dad, because he kept wearing these pants with suspenders and things, for some reason I was getting a Boss Hogg vibe off of him from Dukes of Hazzard.
Mm-hmm. it's a very stereotypical notion of a fat cat, Wall Street, just like, yeah, I just sit back and smoke cigars and let it roll in. They've done enough to tell me, as someone that doesn't follow the business world, that we should see this guy as someone that is going to betray Toby Jones and everyone.
Yeah, not for nothing. I mean, and they don't bring it up in this movie because there's no real reason to, but this is the same Maxwell family. This is Ghislaine Maxwell's father and brother in real life.
Oh, how fun.
In case you needed an extra reason to despise these characters.
Yes. But there's the fourth piece, right? We've talked about how our main character, Hank, is an American in Japan. The programmer was Soviet. Toby Jones is the go-between. And these London people are the ones that can actually turn it into a phenomenon. They can mass market Tetris to the world. But I think the fourth corrupt piece is this KGB agent, Valentine, who is, in these early scenes, he's just kind of stalking around, harassing the programmer. If he's playing tennis with his sons, he's there threatening and saying, you've cost Mother Russia money. You've made it more unproductive by producing this game, and you're not getting the royalties. He will end up being a very nefarious character, too.
What I find very interesting is that Alexei was a game developer in his spare time. He was just a programmer for a corporation during the day, but there was no gaming industry in the USSR back then. There was no Nintendo that didn't get into the Soviet Union.
Productivity. Again, the whole politically speaking, we don't play games. We are all about strength, and it's a whole idea that taking time off and all of that, no, that would not be encouraged.
So I found that just interesting that because they were behind that Iron Curtain where there were no games, this game pirated all over the place and just cost so much productivity in the Soviet Union because government workers were playing it instead of doing their jobs, which I admit in 1990 I played Tetris instead of doing my job.
Yeah, I mean, the whole, solitaire that comes with every IBM. I saw my coworkers in the office in the 90s. Yes, in the end, even though companies, call it capitalist or communist, the people in charge always want you to be working, but there's a temptation. And so, yes, this man is seen as maybe someone that has hurt the Soviet Union. He is under threat. He is under watch here. And I don't know, I wish we had more of Alexei's story. They're going to essentially insist that this is about Hank, and for simplicity's sake, I guess that's a way to go. But we only get a couple scenes of Alexei in his daily life. We see him go to the butcher and they run out of meat, but he's kind enough to give it to a lady that's behind him in line because, communism, they don't have the resources. By 1988, truly, things are falling. Berlin walls are breaking, and they know that these are the last days of the Soviet Union.
I think they give us just the right amount of Alexei. I mean, I think by the end of this movie, we know who he is. We know what type of guy he is. We know he has a big heart. We know that he cares about his family first and foremost. He really doesn't care about the game that much. And he does have pride for his country, which, is a different perspective from what we're seeing from a lot of these other characters portraying Russians.
That said, the giving meat to the woman behind him is just the classic save the cat moment, isn't it? Mm-hmm. It is just the most banal way of saying this is a good guy. You need to like this guy. Look what he did for this woman, when that will never come up again.
No, more important to his story is the fact, and they save it for the end. They save it as a way of bonding him to Hank when Hank comes to the USSR. But the idea is that he is very well aware that these threats that come from Valentine are not idle, that his own father was a professor that just wrote a book and it made it outside, and sales of that book were scandalous enough to mean that he lost his job and his father was perceived as ruined by this. So he is a family man that is frightened to be successful, frankly. And Hank, we like him because he's a capitalist, because he has the chutzpah going into the headquarters for Nintendo right up to the CEO and saying, you want my game. I'm Luigi to your Mario.
That was a fun scene where he basically social engineers his way in, going, I have a meeting. It's not on the books. Oh, can I use the bathroom? And then instead of going to the bathroom, goes into the elevator and works his way right up to the head of the company. And What's funny is from some of the documentaries I've seen, people were doing this. People were bypassing all kinds of corporate structure, and Nintendo kind of encouraged it. Nintendo of Japan loved that kind of attitude of can-do spirit and wanted to reward those who took risks. So I'm not positive how much of this is true versus how much of this is dramatized for the sake of film, but I could actually believe this scene.
Yeah, I suspect this is movie speak, right? This is things that you show that makes audiences laugh. There's not a lot of comedy in this story inherently, so yeah, we're laughing with this guy, and again, that he's willing to do anything and bet his own house in Japan on, again, what seems so small, just on like the rights for a video game sales in Japan.
But meanwhile, we're seeing Hank's daughter here setting up the most obvious of plots too. She has to practice for her school show, and Dad, you're going to be at the show, aren't you? And again, kind of hackneyed, just overdone. We know the dad is not going to make the show, and we're going to see he wants to be a good dad, but this is going to become an all-encompassing endeavor for him. I mean, he put the house up for mortgage without even talking to his wife, who technically is his boss.
To be honest with you, this is the part of the movie that I could have probably done without. I don't think we always need a family in the background to worry about, but they don't dwell here too much. Like you said, Arnie, it's been done before, and I think they know that, so they keep it brief and they keep it quick.
Yeah, they want to put contrast. They want to show that Hank's life and Alexi's life are similar, but look different because one lives in a capitalist society, one lives under communists in the last days. And so, again, Hank, interesting too, in that he has an international flair. Yes, he's technically American, being played by a British actor, but he lives in Japan, has a Japanese family, and has ancestry that leads him to be able to say he's Dutch, that he has a passport that he can use to infiltrate the Soviet Union once he gets wind of the fact that these Maxwells and Toby Jones are a little bit corrupt.
How well are you guys following all of this contract negotiation stuff that Toby Jones doesn't have the rights he's selling to Mirrorsoft? Mirrorsoft doesn't have the rights they're selling to Hank. I mean, I'm following it in broad strokes, and it helps that I really deep dived into the video game industry, wanting to be a game developer, learning about all these rights in the late 90s and early 2000s. But I was curious, for those who don't do quote-unquote the biz of video games, how was this playing?
I'm following it. I think it's pretty well laid out, and it's not too confusing. I mean, if you're watching it just kind of casually and not necessarily paying attention to arcade, console, handheld, then yeah, it's just going to be a confusing mess. But where it started to confuse me was when he shows up and has a copy of his Nintendo version or Famicom version, and he's told that that must be a bootleg because nobody has the rights to make that. So I thought maybe I was confused as to what was going on prior to that, but that doesn't seem to be the case.
Here's what I recommend. I started this on a Friday night and then a Saturday night, and I was kind of tired. If you are not fully alert, if you want to unwind, if you want to have fun, this is not the movie for you. You will struggle with this, absolutely. You need to be fresh, alert, and willing to really listen for the attention to details. What I would say is this first half hour takes too long. The Act 1, there's too much information. There's too many people they have to set up, and they have to set up the Game Boy, which is ultimately the thing that helps you. Once you have the idea of the Game Boy, and there are special rights to handheld devices, the rest of it can fade into the background. But that really doesn't happen until about 40 minutes into the movie.
Yeah, I'll agree. The first half hour of this is a lot of setup that wasn't all that entertaining. I liked that they interspersed it with the video game footage because that helped add a flair to what was overall kind of dry, but I'm also enjoying myself because of the score and the music that's going on here. The moment this movie opens with its score, I knew I was going to groove to some electronica that's kind of video gamey, that, you know, helps augment the feeling of 8-bit, but also isn't cheesy. You know, it's not too retro.
I mean, some of them are actual covers of 80s pop songs sung by Japanese. You know, they have different conceptions about what the music should be. Yeah, sometimes it sounds MIDI and something like that would be playing during a game of Tetris. It works well enough. Again, I feel transported enough into the times, but I do think it's really hard for them to set expectations in this first half hour, and it's a relief once we finally have a character that can just go to the Soviet Union. That should have happened probably 10 minutes earlier. It's Toby Jones, right? Toby Jones, having that middleman in there. First of all, they frame him like he looks like a bad guy, when in fact, he's rightfully mad the Maxwells are not paying him. In the end, the reason why he goes to Atari and makes all of the stakes higher is because he has been betrayed too. And I think that gets undersold. So maybe you just leave him out. You know, maybe you just have it be about the Maxwells. I know they want to have the 4 pieces like Tetris, but Toby Jones is the one that I think is underserved and not helpful.
I think he also serves as an alternate path for our character Hank, right? It's like Hank bet it all. He could crash and burn like the Maxwells, or he could kind of walk in the middle like Toby's character here and only slightly get burned, but still get out alive.
Yeah, he is essentially Toby Jones for Nintendo, whereas Toby Jones is reporting to Microsoft. But yeah, we all want to see Moscow. Like, that's what I've been living for. It's like not even about Tetris for me. I really just like this era. I find it fascinating to think about the Soviet Union at this time. And so, yeah, having Hank bet it all, Nintendo telling him, look, if you go, we can't protect you. This is what spy movies are, right? Like, we step behind the Iron Curtain and there's danger everywhere. And every time he even asks to go to Elorg to talk to someone about video games, there are whispers, he's being recorded, people make phone calls. Good stuff.
My question was, could you really just commercially fly into the USSR back then? I felt like you needed to get pre-clearance to even travel to there.
I think that's why he had to have the tourist visa. My father did go to the USSR in 1987 as a tourist.
And I'm imagining there is a lot of complication to that. And this movie doesn't need any more of that.
Right, yeah, I don't need more paperwork.
Yeah, him at the passport office. No, let's just get there. Again, what I'm urging for is shorthand. I appreciate that you have all of this minutia and detail, but I really just want to see an American lost in the Soviet Union. And so we see him essentially running into someone that looks very pleasant. Like, oh, there are lots of translators, but this pretty young woman comes forward and she seems to have a good mastery of words. And so she's going to be his companion in this. I didn't suspect the betrayal later that she's KGB. Probably should have.
I didn't either. She comes across a little bit ditzy, right? I mean, there's just translators hanging out in this hotel where he's staying that are for hire, and he picks her. I mean, were they all KGB agents? If he'd picked a different translator, would something else have happened?
No, I mean, they're not speaking to something here. That obviously he picked the cute girl, right? That's the thing that made the difference. Other people had approached him, but this is the one that he went with. She was a little more aggressive, too. Worth pointing out that she came to him and could tell that he needed succor or succor.
I thought that because she said relaxation at one point. I'm like, succor? Is this like...
Yes, double entendre. Yes, exactly. That is exactly what they are playing at. And maybe it doesn't come through enough. But yes, the thought that maybe she could service him in other ways is, I think, an undercurrent of their scenes together.
This is where we start to get a little bit of a feel of Cold War era USSR and stuff like that. And I'm trying to modernize this for a younger crowd who has no point of reference for that. And it's like, would they be walking into North Korea at this point and trying to get the rights to something? That's the closest analog I can come up with.
I mean, North Korea is communist and probably, China's sort of the last one. So yes, I suppose there has been, I would say, a refreezing of that general area of the globe. There is a Cold War that is going on currently. Putin is relevant in ways that he didn't feel 20 years ago.
Sure, but I'm talking the era where blue jeans were basically illegal in the country, I mean, that hasn't been the case.
Yes, all countries have to play the capitalist market game now. But in 1988, yeah, it's just worth pointing out that we had a very vast amount of land that, again, it was a wall. The curtain was iron specifically because it was meant to keep out all influence. Again, we don't want video games not only not going out, but coming in. We don't want the influence of Coca-Cola, Levi's jeans, Michael Jackson. Anything the West was selling was meant to be deflected. And you lived with the idea that the only thing that mattered was serving your country. It was patriotism to an extreme degree. I don't know that we have any reference point now for that.
No, you're right, Justin. I hadn't considered it, but this movie has to be aimed directly at our age group, Gen X, because millennials and Gen Z are not going to understand. I don't think it's translated here. You're going to have to do a little bit of history. You're going to have to go watch White Knights and Rocky IV and some other stuff in order to fully understand what's going on in Russia.
America, yeah, there's all that propaganda stuff we watched, but I'm not sure that was any more accurate. But yes, I agree. Part of what's so special about it for me is it was a very unique time in history, and I was alive for it. What will it mean for people that weren't or that don't care about things that are 40 years old? Not the movie for you. Going to go ahead and preview. Not recommend for you for sure, because a lot of this is predicated on nostalgia and interest at this unique moment in Russian history.
But I want to give another credit to Taron Egerton. He's in almost every scene of this movie, and his energy permeates all these scenes. You know, when he's going through the contract with the Russians and saying, you gave them computer rights, and so they're saying that's console rights, you weren't specific enough. This could be really dull in the hands of a lesser actor, but I'm really kind of going with it and having a decent time, and I think I can only credit Egerton for being able to pull that off.
I think it's the editing. Egerton is not in every scene. There are a lot of scenes that he's not. They actually try to play the Tetris game of 4 pieces, 4 different places we could be hopping around. Are we in the USSR? Are we in Japan? Are we in London? Or are we in America? Yes, Egerton is the one we're invested in. We want Hank to win. But I do think that they're trying stylistically. It feels more like Pong than Tetris, but they're trying to make the editing of this movie cut in a way that contract negotiations feel like a chase scene. Semi-successful. I will say some of it is boring. I'm hearing you saying he makes it not boring. Not in every scene. There are lots of this in the middle that I'm going, can we please move on? There are just too many scenes of him being turned away and doors shut. He meets this guy, Nikolai Belikov, who at first will present as a villain, the head of, well, it's the government-run computer programming agency, Elgorg, and he seems to be like just as bad as the KGB agent. But in the end, he will be won over, charmed by this American's capitalist urgings and recognizing that the Soviet Union's going to have to change. So I think Belikov is an interesting character to watch too when he shows up here in the middle.
Right, and I think this is where the 3 different interests that are going after Tetris are personified and shows you how each of these are going to go about it differently. You have the Maxwells who are going at it almost as industrious leeches, right? This is our property. We don't even have to pay them. They're Russians. We can trade or we can just ignore them. And then you have Toby Jones's character, Stein, who's in there, and he's kind of playing the capitalistic game of, I'm going to get in there and I have my relationships with these people, and it's just kind of churning it out in a factory type of way.
He just wants to get paid, right? If it's not Microsoft, then it's Atari, but somebody is going to pay me for all my hard work.
Right. And then I guess what I'm getting at is Hank's approach is partnership. Sure, he's a capitalist, but he's actually there to be a partner and not trying to cut anybody out of a deal.
Yeah, we see that when he meets Alexei, and he's like, I want to be your friend. Programmer to programmer, what did you program this in? You can just see them getting nerdy like that, even in the boardroom. But Alexei is, of course, cautious. Think about the fact that his dad was essentially thrown out of his academic career for this kind of interaction, international communication. So he would like very much to connect to this guy, and ultimately slips him a piece of paper saying, okay, come have dinner at my house in this horrible Eastern Bloc high-rise.
Yeah, and we see that even though they're being careful like this, he's still being followed. We get shots of what we can assume are KGB agents taking photos of him arriving with flowers, and There's some tension here, right? They're having dinner. He wins over Alexi's wife. She's suspicious of him, but eventually wins her over, and they're kind of relaxed. And knock comes at the door, and he has to be hidden away in the bathroom, and they're hoping it's not a raid.
Yeah, all this stuff is good. I would just argue, I'm hearing you say, Justin, is enough for you, but I just feel like so much of this movie is a buddy movie, right? The crux of this is the idea of East and West as represented by Hank and Alexi. This is really their only moment to connect, and it just feels real brief. They run out to the underground secret disco for Europe's final countdown, and then they have to spend the rest of the movie more or less apart until the climax.
It also gives Hank a major part in Tetris development. I mean, the whole thing of doing a Tetris, as I had understood it, is getting 4 lines in a row, which is the most you can get. And here, he's the one who's like, why do you only destroy 1 line at a time? We should destroy a lot of lines at a time. I mean, that made a huge amount of the game fun and really helped up your score.
Mm-hmm. You're right, because they, again, after dinner, he'd been wondering, what did you program in? It's basic, like they share that philosophically, the power of basic, that they go back and reprogram it together. Yeah, again, it happens so fast, is all that I'm saying. This movie's pace, I got a real problem with. This is the stuff that we needed more of. The stuff in the beginning you could have shortened, but I am appreciating the performances. And again, I want to like Alexi hanging out with Hank and learning how to be American. That's a fun dynamic that reminds me of lots of movies from the 80s.
Sure, and I mean, Stuart, you're saying you don't think we get enough of this. I mean, they go out for a night on the town at a secret club with some nice dancing scenes and everything like that.
Yeah, Europe's final countdown. I mean, again, I get it. They try to do it in montage, and I guess I'm just saying I could have used just lingering, just a little bit more of this. I mean, we're talking about a matter of minutes. I don't believe their friendship has been fully formed by the time Hank gets pulled out of the taxi and beaten up by the KGB.
I love that they stole his jeans.
Yeah, I think it might be purposeful. I think the tone of this entire movie is supposed to be frantic. You're supposed to be on edge. You're not sure what could or will happen to you when you're behind the Iron Curtain. And as a viewer, I think you need that frantic energy to go along for this ride.
That said, again, when I think of frantic programmer movies, I think of The Social Network. And, sir, I know The Social Network, and you are no social network. I can say that about this movie at this stage. It's just not giving me that level of energy. Again, I'm reminded of The Informant or some of those movies, again, Matt Damon type stuff, where the stakes are significantly lower.
Yeah, I feel like Social Network was a movie that connected more. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I feel like more people connected to that because more people had a connection to Facebook. Yeah, this feels a little bit smaller. Tetris, yeah. A lot of people play the game, but a lot of people play a lot of games, and I don't know that they would care about its creation as much as this movie is lingering. But again, you could come in this movie and not care anything about Tetris. You could just see this as a Cold War spy movie, as you're saying. It could just be about an American businessman finding out how hard it is to negotiate in a climate of communism and conspiracy. But he has done his job. Hank is able to convince Belikov that he is legit, that he reads through the contracts, explains to him the way that Stein kind of cheated them, helps him rewrite contracts, and Belikov is eventually going to make it so that even though the Maxwells think they have the deal in stone, they don't. Hank has a week, essentially, to come up with the money, go back to Nintendo, and beat Microsoft at this.
Yeah, I mean, and basically, this all comes down to, if the Maxwells hadn't been financially insolvent, this would have been their game. All they had to do was bust out a check for $1 million and done deal, right? But turns out that's not the case.
And they wouldn't be insolvent if they weren't so corrupt to their goddamn core, right? Like a scene that probably should linger, except it's Toby Jones, and he just doesn't have a fist fight scene in him. But he's righteously indignant coming there, being like, when are you ever going to pay me? And realizing the auditors, again, are just shredding everything. They can't even come up with $1 million, and all of his hard work has been for nothing. That this senior Robert Maxwell thought that his friendship with Gorbachev and trading some in encyclopedias of all things would be collateral enough to get this Tetris deal done. But if they don't get Tetris, the Mirosov group is done. And so this now means that daddy has to go with son back to the USSR.
And I mean, I guess it should be said that had all this happened a couple years earlier, it might have gone down like that, right? I mean, so much of this is resting on the idea that the wall's coming down very soon, and Gorbachev and the rest of the higher-ups feel that.
And we get Gorbachev personified here, you know? It's always a risky move when you portray real-world figures like this, but they got a actor and put the splotch on his head, and we see that this Robert Maxwell really is friends with Gorbachev.
Mm-hmm. He's publishing his memoir. That wasn't BS. But yeah, I'll tell you a riskier move. Casting Gorbachev in your movie. He tried to be an actor. I don't know if you guys know that, but the sequel to Wings of Desire, Far Away So Close, I mean, it's a small scene, but there's a reason why politicians don't become movie stars.
Reagan.
You can go the other way. Oh, you can absolutely go the other way. But once you're there in the office, you can't go back to being an actor. Meanwhile, Hank is looking like everything is lost, right? So he has to go back to Japan feeling like he didn't get the deal. A week to find this deal, but getting facts that Belikov is saying no. They have blackmail photos on him because Sasha actually kissed him for a second. And one wonders if there wasn't more. But yes, they would want to imply that he was faithful to his wife, but because she kissed him, that could ruin his marriage. They had goons from the Russian embassy come to Bulletproof headquarters and threaten his wife and his children. And yes, he missed the recital. His daughter sang and he was not there. She sang to an empty chair.
Yeah, spotlight on that seat, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm. I hear you saying that this is cliche and not what we're here for. I agree with you. But what I would ask is, it's a legit point, right? He did have a happy life. You could frame this movie in terms of, like, what you did is not correct. But I think they want to reinforce the idea that risking all, capitalism, betting these big bets is ultimately worthwhile. This daughter will ultimately be the CEO of the Tetris company because dad didn't go to that recital. It really does try to speak to the rocket men, businessmen that weren't home for their kids and left them playing cat's cradle and all that.
Yeah, and I'm fine with all that, and I know the movie needs it, but I guess my criticism is the movie itself doesn't know how far to go with it. Like, sometimes it's like, Hank has 5 kids, sometimes we're just focusing on 2.
Just the one, right? The singing one is the one we care about. In the end, yes, he has lots of children. And so does Alexei, and we have those scenes of the KGB agent that's corrupt. He cut his own deal with Robert Maxwell. He wants Mirosov to succeed, in part because he's going to, he thinks, get a cash deal out of that. But he's threatening to throw the kids out the window and all of this stuff. He's insisting that they call off the deal when he finds out they're working with Hank.
Yeah, he's getting, $300,000 for his efforts, so he's taking bribes, which will be his comeuppance at the end of this.
Yeah, that's satisfying as well. If there are true villains in this, it feels like Robert Maxwell and this guy, Valentine, are really like the ones you boo and hiss at. Everyone else is just money grubbing, right? The worst you can say about them is greedy. But yeah, these people are hurting their family. Robert Maxwell has undercut his son's ability to negotiate these deals. The son walked away in the private plane, drinking from the champagne flute and thinking, I'm finally the cool guy in charge. But he has to go back with his dad and realize dad is bribing people and dad doesn't even have $1 million to secure this deal. I mean, it's a real fall from grace for the son. And I think it was interesting, I don't know if at the end of the credits they mention that Robert dies mysteriously and that Kevin was arrested and questioned for some time about that.
And acquitted, you know.
Yeah, and acquitted.
Yeah, I mean, however they did it, they pinned it all on the senior, right? That over $900 million stolen from employees' pensions at that company. So there's some real life comeuppance there. But one thing that, I keep going back to real world here, and with the KGB, it's like, I know that our point of view character has the motivation of wanting to get bribed because he also senses that the Cold War era is almost over and he's going to need something to do once Russia falls. I suppose we need that, but it also kind of confuses it too because the KGB would be doing this type of thing anyway.
No. I think this is a really important scene, and it goes by quick, but really important scene. So Valentine's the head, and then Sasha, the undercover translator, works for him. She sees both deals on the table. When everyone comes back and shows what they have, and Nintendo is willing to actually give Elgorg, and hence all of Russia, $1 for every time Tetris is sold, she's like, this is the better deal. Our country will flourish from this deal more than with the Maxwells. But Valentine is going with the Maxwells because he personally will profit. So he is picking himself over country. He is being a very, very bad Soviet.
Yes. I guess what I'm saying is more of the following, harassing people on the street.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And I think that might get lost for some people if they don't know that era was like that. You know, I mean, it could just be like, oh, well, Valentine was doing this the whole time because he's a bad guy spy.
I think the reputation of the Iron Curtain is enough to believe that most Americans were fearful that, yeah, you would be taped and framed and bad things would happen to you if you went there. I mean, I lived with the propaganda. Maybe it's hard for me to know. But yes, it all comes to Gorbachev himself. Basically, there's a parade of missiles and tanks, and he's got to pretend like everything is fine. But yeah, he more or less winks at the fact that I want a good Tetris deal to go through because our country is going to have to get into the market. Pure communism, as conceived 80 years ago, is not going to fly anymore. And I think that was a cool moment as well. It sets the stage for a pretty exciting climax. I've got to say, the movie has been only fitfully engaging for much of this time, but this last half hour has got some nail-biting running around. Like, I found myself really in suspense about how Hank particularly was going to win.
I think this is where we see some of the CGI budget of this movie, right? Who would have thought that it would have been spent on a tank parade, but need it to set scale and tone, right?
Yeah, so I wanted that scene. I could tell the CGI fakery in it. I still liked it.
There's going to be some more. I thought you were going to talk about during the car chase when the car hits things, 8-bit pixels fly off the cars and things like that. I thought that stylization was rather strange. But yes, Hank has the luxury of the fact that the contract with Mirrorsoft was broken after a 7-day period where they couldn't write the check. So he's signing the papers, but has to get out of Russia fast. He has to get out of town before the KGB catch him with his signed contract.
Is it too much? Is it too Adam Sandler that they have a car chase where can we fit on the sidewalk or not? Like playing Tetris literally with moving. It's more like Frogger, but moving vehicles. I don't mind it. Again, it's in the spirit of this movie so much to be serious and dour and, again, about contracts. To give us a little fun here at the end. If it's a little bit much, if it's a little bit Hollywood, I don't mind.
Yeah, Hank, the real Hank, was an advisor on this movie and gave them tips about things that really happened. But he said in certain ways, like the car chase, things that never happened, they had to Hollywood this up. And this isn't a documentary. This is a docudrama. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to throw in this climax that is...
Get to the airplane.
You know, I knew they were on the wrong plane. The KGB agents who board the plane, and we see Egerton and the Nintendo guys sitting on a plane, and I'm like, they're getting on the wrong plane. It's that editing trick we've seen so many times where, like Silence of the Lambs, when the FBI agents are going to the wrong house.
Spoiler alert. But yes, I think you can tell that. But again, in that confusion, there is something funny. The KGB boarded the plane to Japan because he assumed the guy was going to go straight home. That would be the logical choice. But we like Hank ultimately because he picks the unexpected. He took the plane that's going to Zurich rather than the one that would take him home. And that's the reason why they were able to taxi out, supposedly. Now, keep in mind the way that this movie frames it. Seconds later, Sasha shows up to arrest Valentine. So even if he hauled him out of the plane, I think that they would have been allowed to continue on their way.
Yeah, and at this point in the movie, this is where I'm starting to go like, oh, okay, so obviously we're going to get some highly dramatized action here because the rest of the movie's been a little bit hard to chew on for some people, and so they got to throw some action in here. And like Stuart, I don't mind it, even though you know this probably didn't go down this way. It's given us a little something to watch and get to the end of this movie with a little bit of a heartbeat going.
What's funny to me is They then have one of those interstitial titles that is the 8-bit graphics, and it says winner player 1, and I'm like, is that just the end? Are we just done? Are you just gonna kill the movie right there? He's on the plane and we're gonna roll the credits? No, they are gonna put a little bit of an epilogue on here, which I'm glad for, because I'm like, that was gonna be a very abrupt ending when it says game complete.
No, there's the family stuff to repair, right? Like the wife and kids that were more mad about the fact that he missed a recital than the fact that they don't have a home anymore. And so he's there when they get home. He's created a makeshift stage in their living room and asked his daughter to perform all of that stuff. Yeah, you want to feel, in contrast, there was a risk of him losing his house in the same way that Alexei was thrown from his house and needs a new home. He will end up sending him a Game Boy with plane tickets to come to San Francisco. And because the Berlin Wall has fallen, this Soviet programmer that has never been anywhere else in the entire world can become an American.
Yeah, and it should be said, we do see Hank with his $5 million royalty check from Nintendo, letting us know it all worked out. We didn't need a montage of Game Boys rolling off the factory floor or anything like that, but I think we all get it at this point.
Well, again, if you're selling the idea that this is about friendship and about the way that Russia and America became partners in capitalism, sort of a fairy tale, but clearly we see that it doesn't end well. Is the sequel going to be these two at each other's throats? But we want to have the perfect strangers kind of marriage of, it was about more than money. It was about respect and programming and brotherhood. And they end on a hug between both programmers there in the airport. That's what they're trying to signal.
You say perfect strangers, I'm now just picturing them doing the Miko dance of joy.
Yeah, there's some of that here in the credits. And I always like when we have docudramas, when they will show the actual footage of the real people and you go, oh, that looks nothing like Taron. Not even close.
Not even the same race.
Right? Alexei was pretty close. That was good casting.
Mm-hmm, yeah. But cast with an actor I don't know. So, yeah, that's easier to do, right? We'll get someone that looks like him, but we needed a star. Yeah, Toby Jones, I guess you can, replicate that look pretty easy. But yeah, that was kind of, again, it humanizes everything that we've seen and reminds us that at least some of it was a true story.
But is it a story you would recommend? Justin, Stewart, do you recommend the movie, not the game, because everybody loves the game, Tetris? Justin.
Hey, maybe it's because I didn't know what to expect with this movie, and it kind of came out of nowhere. You know what I'm saying? It's not like Apple TV Plus is out there advertising on other platforms or anything like that. So a lot of people may have not even seen this on their radar. So when I heard we were doing Tetris, I said up front, my first thought was, oh, maybe it's a documentary. And sitting down with this, I was pleasantly surprised to find out that it was a story. And we're going to get to learn how Tetris was done. Because we're all about the same age, and I'm sure you guys heard stories back in the day how the guy who created Tetris was Russian and he never got paid for it. Those type of stories went around, and, I'm sure it became somewhat of a legend over the years. But here we are, 30, 40 years out from all that, and I never heard the story. I never heard what happened with any of this stuff. So now's the time to tell it, and I was intrigued. I followed this. I followed the contract negotiations. I enjoyed the performances of everybody. And at the end of the day, there's some flourishes here and there that maybe make this feel a little cheesy in parts. But overall, I enjoyed it, and I'm glad that they did it. What it made me want to do is dig in a little bit more and find out how much of this was dramatized. And shockingly, not a whole heck of a lot. I mean, things like the interpreter wasn't actually KGB. That was made for this movie. But the Maxwell stuff, that was all real. Toby's character was a real person. The Nintendo negotiations were real. They might have heightened the scenes where they're in contract negotiations in a three-way deal like that. That might have not all happened at the exact same time. But, hey, you need that stuff for a movie. So, I think it's a neat piece of history. And if you wanted to find out the details behind Tetris, hey, this is a fun way to do it. So, it's a nice recommend for me coming out of the arcade. Nice little surprise.
Stewart.
I was won over. I can't say that I experienced the delight that you're describing, Justin. And truth be told, the struggle that I was having, I don't know if I would have given this a second chance. I could have easily turned it off after the half-hour mark and never gone back to it. But if you do stick it out, I do think, not unlike a game of Tetris, it starts out slow and quaint, but once those blocks really start coming down, like, my pulse was racing. I'm like, okay, the last 50 minutes is captivating. I wanted to see how it all came out, and I was rooting for Hank to be the capitalist that came out on top. It's a winner. In the end, I did enjoy this. The car chases, the shakedowns, the Hollywoodization of this story is what makes it fun. I think that this stuff usually makes a good magazine article, maybe a book. It's really, really hard to dramatize the fine print. That's what this feels like. You have to read a contract before you can play the toy. But you will have fun. And if you're willing to have that patience, it's a recommend in the end.
Yeah, 3 for 3. I mean, first of all, it's not hard for a middling movie to get a recommend in the Now Playing Arcade, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, yes. I was trying not to grade on the Uwe Boll scale. Everything is Green Arrow on the Uwe Boll scale.
But I had a good time with this movie. Not as good as I expected. I really came in with high hopes based on that trailer that we would get another social network type intrigue movie with some better personal stakes and some more unique characterizations. I feel like most of the characters here are stock types, even though they're based on real people. But yeah, I enjoyed all of the twists and turns of the contract negotiations. I was able to follow it all, and I liked the villainous characters. They're just villainous enough without being over the top. I wish there was more humor in it. The one thing about video games is they're fun, and Tetris is very fun, and I don't think this movie has a lot of the fun in it. You talk about getting energized during the climax, and that's about the time when things really start to go there, but I think this could have done with a few more jokes, a little more lightness, a little more humor, because it doesn't really work as an espionage film. I never really feel the walls closing in on Hank. I oftentimes can feel claustrophobic in a movie where I feel like our hero has no way out. I get a physical feeling off of that. One example of that is The Firm. I remember being physically uncomfortable thinking that Tom Cruise had no escape in that movie. And here, I never really felt that. And maybe it's because I know how the story ended. I know that Tetris shipped with Game Boys, but it lacked that oomph. So I never need to go back and rewatch Tetris the way I rewatch The Social Network sometimes, because it's just that good of a film. But it's good enough to pass some time and inform some history of the video game industry. And so, yeah, I can definitely give it a solid recommend.
Agreed. Yeah, I had trouble with it too. More humor would have helped. I do think, because it's about a video game, it's inherently funny to think that so much was riding, so much national pride was riding on whether Tetris went to Nintendo or Mirrorsoft. That's just a funny thing for me to contemplate, and a sense of humor would have helped. It would have helped Stan and Ollie too. I don't know that this was the director. You keep bringing up Social Network, and that really whets my appetite for a David Fincher film, because I think he's a director that knows how to make things feel slow and intense at the same time, whereas this director just likes slow.
And some humor with the Winklevi and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if this was a funnier movie, they could have ended it with the meta-knowledge of somebody at Apple negotiating the contract for the Tetris movie, right? You know?
I kept expecting Putin to show up. Am I crazy? But I know he was in the KGB at this time. I kept thinking he might be the one to arrest Valentin or something, that they make it a contemporary story in some way, but didn't get there. For whatever reason, they got close enough for 3 recommends, and in the video arcade, that is a rare thing to do. So I'll end on saying I'm satisfied with that, and happy to know that we are closing it out. That there are just a couple more video game movies to cover. We're going to knock them out in the next couple weeks. We got Werewolves Within, a virtual reality game I've never heard of course, that came out, I guess, about 5 or 6 years ago, and has a movie that came out 2 years ago that I also never heard of.
Same boat.
And then after that, the foreign film Detention, which is a game I've never heard of.
Because all kids want to play Detention, right? Like, why wouldn't you want to, simulate that experience? But it's J-horror, right? What's exciting to me is it kind of looked like The Ring or something like that. We'll find out.
And speaking of horror, if you are a Deadite level donor this donation drive, or if you donated for Evil Dead in the past, we're finally getting it. It was supposed to come out last fall, but Evil Dead Rise actually got promoted from a streaming release to a theatrical release. It is out now, and we will be reviewing it for our donors this Friday. I'm looking forward to going back to the Sam Raimi world and seeing how does Evil Dead work, even without Bruce Campbell saying groovy at the very end in a cameo that made no sense.
You know, I like that reboot. I feel like it's been forgotten, but I think it can work without Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell. We'll see. Yeah, the trailers are encouraging.
So you can find the details on how to get all of our bonus shows this spring and summer at nowplayingpodcast.com/donate or on our Patreon, patreon.com/nowplayingpodcast. Thank you for your support of our show. It allows us to do the shows we do every single Tuesday. And Justin Stewart, thank you for joining me. And until Werewolves Within, game over.
I played Tetris for 5 minutes. I still see falling blocks in my dreams.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Now Playing Podcast. We hope you've enjoyed the show.
It's in a completely different league.
Come back to NowPlayingPodcast.com each week for another new movie review podcast.
Good ideas have no borders.
And in the NowPlayingPodcast.com archives, you can find reviews of other video game movies, including Resident Evil, The Wizard, and more.
8-bit music and floppy disks that people copied and shared for free. It spread like wildfire.
Also at our site, you can find hundreds of other movie reviews, including Star Wars, A Nightmare on Elm Street, Independence Day, the Avengers films, Back to the Future, Batman, Superman, The Fast and the Furious, and more.
Can I play?
Do you want to continue? Insert money now to keep playing Now Playing.
You want me to bribe you? Is that what this is?
Now Playing Podcast is a show without any sponsors or ads. We rely on support from listeners like you to keep Now Playing operating.
They don't care about money, son. They care about loyalty.
You can donate to the show and, as our thank you, receive bonus podcasts. Over 150 bonus movie reviews are available to choose from on the Now Playing Podbean page, including Alien, Night of the Living Dead, Jurassic Park, Ghostbusters, Indiana Jones, Lord of the Rings, Psycho, Troll, and more. Find a full list of available bonus shows at nowplayingpodcast.com/donate.
This gives you 30 hours of gameplay, all for $89.
You can also join the Now Playing Patron campaign. Patrons of $10 or more get a new exclusive movie review every month, plus even more perks, including one where you can pick a movie for our hosts to review. Find the details on our website.
It's poetry, art, and math all working in magical synchronicity.
You can follow Now Playing on Facebook and Twitter, where we post announcements of new episodes and where the hosts post movie mini reviews. Links to our social media pages are available on our homepage.
Was this coded in Pascal or C?
Now Playing Podcast is produced by Arnie Carvalho.
Nobody helped me get to where I am today.
Associate produced by Jason Latham.
You want to play with the big boys, son? This is how the world works. Suck it up.
Now Playing is edited by Santiago and Arnie.
Jesus, no, I'm not that crazy.
Now Playing credits read by Brock.
Do you know who I am? I've got an idea.
Venganza Media Incorporated is not affiliated with the motion pictures reviewed or otherwise referred to herein. All movie clips and music included in this podcast are the intellectual property of their respective copyright holders. They are included here for the purpose of review and no infringement is intended.
Can you get us the rights?
The opinions expressed on Now Playing are those of the individual hosts and may not reflect the opinion of Venganza Media Incorporated.
Your cowboy reputation precedes you.
Now Playing Podcast is an exclusive trademark of Venganza Media Incorporated. Now Playing is a Venganza Media production, copyright 2023, all rights reserved, and no part of this show may be reproduced, repurposed, or redistributed without the express written permission of Venganza Media Incorporated.
Go home! And thanks for the Levi's.
There are a lot of machinations and licensing agreements that would be word salad if I went through it all here. And behind the scenes, I wrote it all here and then decided to just strike it from the plot summary.
I know. These are not plots. Who wants to see a movie about this? This is like people that, like, you bought the Game Boy, but you're going to read the fine print and the instructions before you turn the thing on. I'm like, I got to know all the details. Okay.
But suffice it to say, the Russian government wants Mirrorsoft to have the game.